All right, everyone, welcome to today's CTL Skill Up series webinar. So the CTL has recently moved their webinar series to more of a meeting format in Zoom. We thought maybe it would be a little bit more engaging for our staff, students, and faculty. And so we realized that you're joining us from all over. You are welcome to have your camera on. You would be muted until we actually unmute you if you have any questions. You're welcome to keep your camera off as well too. We invite you to participate in either way in that capacity. The meeting format doesn't have a Q&A. So while we navigate our new series with the Skill Up series, if you do have questions, please pop that in the chat. We would absolutely like to take your questions in there. And then if time permits, we may be able to raise our hand and unmute and ask our wonderful librarian, Alex, any questions as time permits. So as always, we're recording our webinar. We will pop this in the CTL Resource Center for future reference. And if you'd like to see the scrolling subtitles, you're more than welcome to hover over the bottom of your Zoom over the CC option and hit show subtitle if you would like to view that in the duration of our Skill Up series event today. So I think that explains it. If you have questions or need help with anything technically speaking, find me in the chat. But we're really excited that Alex has come back to present today. Alex is going to be doing how to read a scholarly article. So a great refresher for all those of us who have been diving into the library for some time, and also for our new students as well. Alex, I turn this over to you.
Thank you so much. Always excited to be here with CTL. Thanks so much for that warm welcome. Just give me a moment here where I kind of move you guys around my screen so I can see where everything is that I've so diligently set up. So as I was introduced, my name is Alex. If you hover over my little image here, you'll see Alex Plante. I am a librarian. My pronouns are she and her. Please, as I am talking, feel free to drop questions into the chat. And I really am I'm hoping that we will have plenty of time at the end of this for you to actually ask me questions in person. So like I always say, there is no such thing as a silly question, as a simple question, right? They're all questions, and I guarantee you, if you have the question, there's probably two other people that have the exact same question as you. So hopefully that will give you a little bit of courage as we go forward. So I am going to present as was discussed on reading a scholarly article. And so we're going to talk about reading it, but I also wanted to give you guys a little bit of context, right? So I sort of adjusted the title here to just be like Introduction to Scholarly Articles. And like I said, that is my name down there. I am a reference and instruction librarian. I'm actually originally from the NCU side. So my colleagues and I, recently got together with the NU librarians, and we are now all together NU librarians. And one thing that I'd like to just say here at the top of the hour, there's many of us. I've actually never worked in such a large library before, with so many librarians that are available to answer your questions. And one thing that we offer, and hopefully I'll get a little bit of time at the end to kind of show you how to do this. One thing that we offer is actually what we call one-on-one consultations, so that you guys are able to meet with us. You can talk about your dissertation work. You can ask questions about a research paper that you're doing for class. You can also just get a little bit of what I like to call tailored one-on-one like orientation, right? We call those sort of like our getting started seminars. So like I said, if you want some of that one-on-one, don't feel like this is the only way that you can get this information. You are always welcome to come and meet with us one-on-one. So let's get into it. I like to have an agenda. One, it keeps me on task. Otherwise, I would just talk for hours about this stuff. But more importantly, you guys will get a pretty good idea of what is upcoming. Okay. So first and foremost, we are going to start with some definitions. Who doesn't love a good definition, right? All scholars enjoy defining things. So we're going to talk about what is a scholarly article or a research or a resource, I should say. What is peer review, as well as examples, a couple options down there. What is, different peer reviewed options, academic journals, and then we'll take a look at a really cool research called Ulrich's Web. And then we will get into the actual anatomy of an article. So this is how we'll get into how you are meant to read scholarly articles, because it is different than, say, your People magazine or your GQ article. And then, like I said, we will have plenty of time. That is my hope for some Q&A. So our first definition, right? What is a scholarly article? How does an article become scholarly? And how the heck do you find scholarly articles on the library website? So that is a lot of information, right? We are not going to eat the whole horse, as they like to say, but absolutely, I am going to make sure that you guys get a little taste of what's going on. So first and foremost, we've got a definition up here, and it's worth reading out loud. And I also have it here written. So, we have different ways of learning, different ways of taking in information. So if you prefer to listen, fine. If you prefer to read, ignore me. But a scholarly article is written by researchers or experts in a field to share the results of their original research or analysis with other researchers or students like yourselves. The articles often go through a process known as peer review, where the article is reviewed by a group of experts in the field of study. So something that I love to remind scholars and students when I'm talking to them about this kind of work is that you yourselves are actually participating in the creation of scholarly work, right? So for those of you that are writing your dissertations right now or thinking about writing your dissertations, that is going to become a piece of scholarly work, right? That is going to become something that maybe you'll get it added up into ProQuest, into the dissertations and theses, right? You might even wind up publishing it in an academic journal, right? You might even continue to write more. Many of you might actually be coming to us having already been a published author, right? Maybe you've already published something and contributed to an academic or an industry based journal, right? So something that I think is really nice and an important distinction for you all to make, an important connection for you all to make, is that you are part of this process. So when we talk about scholarly articles and scholarly publishing, you're a part of that process. You might be at different levels, right, on that journey, but you are absolutely a part of that process. So the work that you're doing right now is going to be considered a piece of scholarly work in the future, right? It might not be peer reviewed, it might be peer reviewed, and we'll get into what that is. So a couple of key points that I want to leave you guys as we walk away from this slide, but it's written by experts. Now, I've specifically said experts here because that expert could be a PhD, they could be an MD, they could be a master's, right? They could just held their master's. They could also just be what we call like an independent researcher, right? Somebody who's been working a very long time in the field. And they know the ins and outs of it. They are trained, right, in research and inquiry. So not everybody is going to have the same sort of credentials behind them. It is oftentimes original research, or at the very least, original analysis. And then there is the intention for this information to be shared with interested parties. And that really is the crux of the reason that we care so much about what type of information you're getting, right? And evaluating the information that you're getting. And more often than not, these articles are going to be what is known as peer reviewed, okay? So I'm going to take us on a brief sojourn over to the library website, okay? If you guys haven't been here, it's a newly revamped NCU. It still says ncu.edu, but it is in fact, part of the NU library. This is my home. This is what I'm used to. That's why I'm demoing on here. But basically what we have here is your portal into finding scholarly articles. So for those of you where this is a refresher, like I said, you know, you can choose to listen to me or zone out for a moment. For those of you that have never done this before and you're curious about how do you actually start this research, you're going to come down here into the very center of the page, right where it says Roadrunner Search. That might go away at some point, but for right now, this is our main thoroughfare into our databases. Right away, you can start typing in keywords. I started to type in something in my field. Something I'm very interested in is, you know, making libraries more accessible. And so I put in a couple of keywords: libraries, accessibility, okay? And then down here, we know what you guys are interested in. So we already have a checkbox ready to go that says scholarly/peer-reviewed journals. That means I want my results to only come from those types of journals. I'm going to go ahead and click it and hit submit. I always cross my fingers here to see what happens. You never know when you do live searches what's going to happen. Okay, so I get a whole bunch of search results, right? You can see up here, I've got over 250,000, right? I went to library school, not mathematics. I didn't go into mathematics, but I never want to talk about numbers out loud. But basically what I've done here is I have generated a list of articles that are available that are published in scholarly journals, peer-reviewed journals, right? And you can usually tell what types of information sources they are by over here. So this is a conference, right? This is probably a conference write-up or a conference paper. This here is classically what is known as like an academic journal. So if I click into it, I can get the name of the journal, right? So down here under source, right? Or publication type, yeah. There we go, Sage Publications, Health Promotion and Practice. Let me just make sure. Oh, so Medline is our database that we're getting it from, right? So you start to learn a little bit about where you're coming from. So here's our source, Health Promotion and Practice, okay, from 2020, fairly new. Okay, this is the name of our journal that we're looking at. We know that it's a journal article because it's down here under publication type. It's a review, research support, right? And we also know that the database we actually got it from is Medline, right? So very, very interesting. I don't always assume that I'm going to find library information in a medical specific database, but I think because again, I'm looking a little bit towards that idea of accessibility, right? You're kind of opening up the doors to different types of materials. So that's how you get started on your scholarly article journey, all right? Any quick questions here, because that was a lot of information. So I wanna make sure that you all are able to follow that pathway.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's going to be a few questions that come up, but one of the questions was wondering if we can provide our students a PDF version of your PowerPoint.
Of course.
Great.
Yes, absolutely.
And then the other piece I was going to ask is there any way you can enlarge the print on the screen a little bit?
Oh, yes.
I know how to do it. It's the three little dots on the right-hand side, right by your face.
Right over here.
Yep. And then there's a zoom and 100. Yeah, if you could go to like 125, I feel like that'd be good.
125. I think it says 175. Is that okay? Is that too much?
That might be too big, but we'll see. All right.
How about that?
If you don't mind. Thank you so much. That's
is that it? I think. Okay, good. Thank you.
Can you go back to I'm so sorry, the library real quick, just the accessibility piece? Yeah, yes. Would you mind expanding it just a little bit here too? Sorry about that. That's much better.
Is that good, everybody? Cool.
Yes, thank you so much.
Awesome.
Anything else that has come up question-wise, any of our attendees so far with anything that Alex has covered? Oh, I think we're all set for right now, Alex. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. And thanks for that call out. That's very important. It's very hard. Sometimes when you're staring at your own little screen for so long to know what it looks like on other screens.
Yeah,
so thank you very much.
Absolutely.
All right. So how exactly does something become scholarly, right? How exactly does peer review feature into this discussion that we're having, right? So I'm sure for those of you that are newer to this process, you've probably heard this conversation around, oh, that's a scholarly article. Oh, it's a peer-reviewed article. Oh, it's a referred right? Some of you might have even heard that term, article. What does that actually mean? In a lot of cases, we're all referring to the same concept, which is kind of the highest level. And again, this is a lot of words, so I'm going to read it out loud. So if you've got your captioning on, you should also be able to see it, on the bottom of your screen, but I'll also be sharing these slides with you. So the definition of peer review is the process of subjecting an author's scholarly work, their research, or their ideas to the scrutiny of others who are experts in the same field. So there again is that idea of experts in the field, right? That was in that last definition for what is a scholarly article, and here it comes up again. So now that article that was created by an expert in the field, peer review is bringing in other experts in the field to scrutinize their work, to take a look at their work. Peer review is intended to serve two main primary purposes, right? There's a couple of purposes that peer review does, right? That sort of serves, but there's two major ones that are important for our discussion today. So first and foremost, I would say, peer review acts as a filter to ensure that only high quality research is published, especially in reputable journals, academic journals, by determining validity, significance, and the originality of a study. Okay, so validity, significance, and originality, those are the main things that peers are going to be looking at when they are reviewing scholarly work. Secondly, peer review is also intended to improve the quality of the manuscripts, articles that are coming through, right? So once something has been deemed, this is good work, right? There's a solid foundation here. Oftentimes what peers are doing is they are asking for additional revisions. They're asking for the original writer to maybe explain something a little more thoroughly. Maybe they will ask them to provide more visualizations, data, graphs, things like that is going to make the work just a little bit more accessible for readers. So peer reviewers provide suggestions to authors on how to improve the quality of their manuscripts, and they identify any errors that need correcting before publication. Okay, so who are these experts, right? Before an article can be published, a peer-reviewed article is reviewed by a board of editors. Okay, so you submit to academic journal, letter X, right? And there's a board, an editorial board, not unlike an editorial board that you'd find at a newspaper or a magazine. They sort of they look at all the submissions that come in, and they say, all right, this one's about psychology. I'm going to ask Dr. So-and-so to review, or I'm going to ask doctors so-and-so to review. So basically we're saying something that comes in the field of psychology, we're going to ask other doctors of psychology to take a look at it, right? We're not going to ask a doctor of anthropology or a doctor of medicine, right, to look at it, because that's not the right field. We're trying to match subject matter with subject matter experts, okay? And that might also start to make sense to you if you start to think about your own dissertation process. Oftentimes, you're getting assigned to a chair, but then there's a subject matter expert, right, who's kind of helping this whole process as the person who understands what it is that you're interested in writing about, maybe even more so than your chair. Okay. And then just a note, sometimes you will see this term called referred or refereed. And basically, it's just another term for peer review. And the reason that it's used is it's sort of like, if you can think about like a soccer match, right, or a football match, there's a referee, right, who kind of calls, flags on the plays and makes sure that everything is, above board. Same idea here with the peer review, is that they're looking at the work and they're saying, they're asking critically, was this done in a fashion that we feel comfortable with? Were certain ethics adhered to, methodologies adhered to? Do we think that this is contributing, right, to the body of knowledge within our field? So there's a couple of examples, right? Because again, you will hear people use the terms peer-reviewed journal, scholarly journal, academic journal. You hear them used interchangeably. So we want to kind of talk about what does that mean, right? So scholarly resources, there are peer-reviewed journals, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is a journal that is peer-reviewed, okay? There's scholarly or academic journals. Many of these are also peer-reviewed, okay? I don't want to get too into it today, but there's levels of peer review. The highest level of peer reviewed is known as what is double-blind peer review, which basically means that, okay, so I write an article about libraries and I submit it to, I don't know, Academic and Research Libraries Journal of America. It gets submitted to two peers and I don't know who they are. I don't know what their names are. I don't know where in the United States they sit. I don't know what they do, right? I don't know what their jobs are, and they're giving me the feedback. That is sort of the highest level of peer review, and many, many, many academic journals participate in that level of peer review. The other levels of peer review are also very stringent. They just tend to differ a little bit on just say, let's say how many readers you get, right? So how many, folks get a copy of your manuscript to take a look at. Some scholarly and academic journals are not peer reviewed, okay? And there's different reasons for why that might be. Peer review, for some of you who are kind of astute, you might be able to read between the lines that sometimes peer review can be, it can be very limiting, right? Only certain folks will be able to maybe be able to submit, right? There are definitely some disciplines out there that are a little bit newer. They might not necessarily have the experts available to do the same stringent level of peer review. It doesn't mean that publishing in those journals is bad. It usually just means it's more of an editorial decision. So if we go back to that editorial board, they might be the ones making the decision, and it's not this like double blind, many, many months of back and forth revisions, right, with your peer reviewers. It's usually sort of like a consortium, right, of experts who are maybe making the decision. Still scholarly, but not exactly that same level of peer review that we've been talking about. And then we have what are known as open source academic journals. Open source or open access, right, is maybe a term that some of you have heard before. All that open access means is that there was a movement in the early 2000s, and it was started within the health and sciences communities, where they were basically like, gosh, these journals that we contribute to are so expensive, right, that you really can't access them unless you go to a university that is paying for access to those articles, right? I'm sure some of you have come across maybe doing like a Google search and you see this really great article, you click on it and it says you have to pay $45, right, to download it and read it. Don't ever do that. This is a sidebar disclaimer. Don't ever pay. Come to a librarian, ask us if we can find it for you. And in most cases, we will be able to find it for you and there will be no cost to you whatsoever. So don't ever pay for anything. Promise. pinky promise, you guys.
I can't tell you, that's happened to me, Alex. And I'm like,
so many
what?
times.
And
come to us, Emily. We'll find it.
And I do have to say, just so you know, because this is applicable to that,
Yep.
for one of the questions in the chat. If a student can't find an article or they have to pay for an article in order to access it, like you're saying, the student's question is, how long does it take to get that article from the library if they do an interlibrary loan?
Yeah.
Is
In
there
some
a
cases,
hard rule fast?
Is there an SLA on that?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to be totally transparent.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes when scholars can understand why things take the time that they take, it's because of the process. So to be in full transparency, we in some cases we can get it really quickly, a turnaround of let's call it 48 hours,
Okay.
right? In other cases, it takes us a little bit longer. And the reason why is because the way that interlibrary loan is set up in many cases, especially if you are trying to get something that is a book chapter,
Oh,
or something that was maybe published originally in print, it's going to take a little bit longer. And that is because we are literally asking a librarian in another academic institution to go get it.
okay.
So we're basically saying, a book that was published in 1945 and you want a particular chapter, and we go and we ask, UPenn, okay?
Mhm.
And their librarian that handles interlibrary loan literally has to go out into the stacks, find it, scan it, send it to us, right? And then it gets shared to you. Now, these processes have been made super easy because we use a worldwide accepted, it's called OCLC, process to do this. So it's like everybody logs in, they've got their tickets, they submit, it comes through to you directly. You never actually need to talk to us, right? But in some cases, right, we are asking for things that are maybe a little bit harder to get. If it's an electronic source and all somebody has to do on their side is click OK,
Right.
it usually just shoots right over to you. So unfortunately, there's not like a hard and fast
Mm.
deadline, but we try to get everything within, I do believe we try our darndest to get everything within a week's time.
Thank you so much for
Mhm.
that heads up. So, as scholars and students are looking for different materials, just
Yep.
keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Procrastination is probably not our friend in that situation.
Sadly, it's not. And I am so sympathetic to our students who do come, onto chat, for example, and they're
Yeah.
looking for something and they're like, well, why can't I get it right now? And it's like, well, you know, um,
Well,
it's not that we don't want to give it to you, it's that we don't actually have access to it, right? To give it to you.
at this second. So thank you
At
so
this
much.
second. Mhm.
Thank you so much for answering that question. I don't want to mess up your flow, but I thought it was like
No,
a
we're good.
perfect interjection. Okay.
It's actually a really good interjection, probably more so than you even realize,
Oh,
because open source, right, or open access academic journals, what they've tried to do is kind of limit how often we have to do this, right? Because if you think about interlibrary loan, we're still asking for something that another library is paying for, right? Um, but open access and open source journals, so there's some popular ones like PLOS One, PLOS One is a really popular one, especially for health and sciences. They are basically inviting scholars and academics to publish to them directly, and then they allow that to be open to everyone. And that is something that's easily searchable on something like a Google Scholar, right? You can even just go to plus, I think it's just plus one .org or something like that, and you can actually like read it the way that you would read like a magazine, right? You can select an issue and take a look at it. But to sort of the point about I need it now, one of the things that Google Scholar has been really great about doing, and if none of you have been to Google Scholar, I encourage you after this to visit scholar.google.com and poke around there. What they've done is they've actually they're using their technology to search open access and freely available text out on the internet, that are academic, right? That are sort of academic and scholarly minded, so that in a lot of cases we can find you a copy of something that you want to read, but usually it's living, say, on the academic's website themselves or on the university's website. A lot of academics don't agree with scholarly publishing and they just want their work out there. So a lot of them will like take a PDF version of their article and just like stick it on their website, and then Google finds it and serves it up to us. So that's why I say in a lot of cases, we try to exhaust Google Scholar first before even trying to do interlibrary loan, especially for those students that are trying to get something really quick. So the last thing I want to say about open source academic journals as it pertains to this discussion is sometimes they're not as let's say academically focused, peer reviewed focused as other ones. So it's worth kind of doing a little bit of research to see what the process is. Again, every one of these journals has the process. um, you know how do you actually like submit, how do we actually approve things, right? So we'll take a look at that in just a moment. But just know that, there's different types of scholarly resources out there where peer-reviewed articles might be living. And then just as sort of as a foil, right, to the academic and the scholarly resources, there's of course non-scholarly resources out there that do not partake in peer review at all. So these would be examples of like trade or industry. So for example, a good one that always comes up, especially from my business students out there, the Harvard Business Review is not a scholarly journal. Okay, it is more of a trade or an industry focused journal. Same thing with like Financial Times, The Economist, right? Really excellent sources of information and very palatable, right? Easy to read, but not scholarly review. Okay. News and opinion, right? So the New York Times, Washington Post, The Atlantic, Wall Street Journal, right? Those are news and opinion. Again, not scholarly, very well researched in many cases, but not peer reviewed. And then of course, the very bottom of the barrel is your Popular and your tabloid. They also tend to be the most fun to read, right? So those are your GQs, your Esquires, your People Magazine, Cosmopolitan, those, I'm dating myself. But those are, sort of the lowest level of resource. They are not going to be used, at least in most cases. I can think of some reasons why you might use them in a dissertation, but probably not for the reasons you're thinking of. So, if we're thinking of like a pyramid of information, peer review is all the way at the top. And then all the way at the bottom, of the pyramid is your Popular or your tabloids. Okay. So one question that you're probably thinking of right now is, well, I'm out there on either the library website or I'm out there on Google Scholar. How do I know if something is a scholarly journal or a peer-reviewed journal? There's actually a tool that you have access to as a student that is going to do the work for you. It's called Ulrich's Web. Now, you're probably going, oh no, I am never going to remember that name. And I understand. But the nice thing is, when you come back to our library website and you go into our research resources, we organize all of our databases according to the alphabet, the English alphabet. And the lovely thing about naming your database with a U is that you tend to be the only database that is available under that letter. So at the very least, if you can remember that this weird tool starts with the letter U, you are going to find it. So Ulrich's Web, I've already opened it up over here. So Ulrich's Web is essentially a database that is just going to look for journals, right? Or what I should say, said a different way, it organizes and keeps track of journals, okay? So for example, if I go back to, let's actually let me find a different article here. So that's another one of these health and promotion ones. I want to find one that's a little bit, there we go. Looks like it's a law review. Yeah. So here's a law review, right? John Marshall Law Review. Let's see if that comes up as a scholarly journal. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so it's here, but there's some caveats to it, right? So you can see up here, there's like a little diagram, all right? Would you guys like me to make this a little bit bigger for you to see? It's a little small.
If you
Yeah.
can.
You bet I can. All right.
Ta-da. Thank you.
So what this is showing is the title, right, of the journal, and then who the publisher is. And you can see that there's a couple instances, right, of the law review that have popped up. One of them I can tell you right now is probably the print version, and one of them is probably the electronic version. That would be my initial guess. They are considered two separate publications, but then there's a lot of additional information that you can kind of get at here. So for one, this little guy up here, I'm going to hover it, has TOC, has a table of contents, right? All right. So John Marshall Law Review has a TOC. Okay. But guess what? it doesn't have a peer review. So this little black icon up here is a referred, and this little star over here means reviewed. So it's neither referred nor marked as peer review. It means that it's a law review, but no peers have come in to sort of suss out the reviews. Now, law reviews are a little bit of a different case, right? So if I've got any legal folks on the phone, I probably don't, they don't have the same strictures, right? What they're actually looking for is decisions, right? And reviews, which again, they're sort of coming directly from the judge, right? Or the court, right? That made a decision. So it's sort of a different idea, but this is a good one, right? Because we can sort of take a look at, you know, okay, there's other types of academic resources out there that aren't necessarily reviewed. Now, I was correct. That means this is an electronic resource versus this is a print resource. So let's see one that's actually, I know should be peer reviewed. So journal, what is it called? It's called the New England Journal of Medicine. Here we go. All right. So you can see now there's a whole lot more of these icons popping up. Okay. You can see it's published by the Massachusetts Medical Society. You would imagine something called the New England Journal of Medicine would probably be published up there. And right away, you can see a bunch of stars. So these have all been reviewed. Okay. These all are refereed. You've also got a table of contents, and you've even got an electronic version down here. So if you were out there searching and you found an article and it said it's coming from the New England Journal of Medicine, you plugged it into Ulrich's web, you would be able to confirm that indeed this is a scholarly article because it is coming from a scholarly / peer-reviewed academic journal. Make sense? It's a very useful tool. So I think, you know, once again, if you're searching directly through the library, chances are you're already going to be finding scholarly and peer-reviewed journals because you're sort of self-selecting. But if you're out there on Google, or if you maybe found a reference in like somebody else's, you know, footnotes or something like that, you know, and you're not sure if this article is peer-reviewed and you want to double check before you try to track it down, this is where you're going to track that down to see if it's peer-reviewed. All right, Ulrich's web. Remember it, my friends. All right, so now we're going to get into the most exciting part. Well, I think it's the most exciting part of this journey, which is we're going to talk about how to read a scholarly article, because it's not read in the same way that you would read a book or an article in the newspaper, or I don't know, you know, an ingredients list, right? It's really not read in any of the ways that we would think about reading a more traditional piece of writing, okay? So let's look at the different component parts, or what I like to think of as like the anatomy of a scholarly article. All scholarly articles are going to have bibliographic information, which is a fancy librarian term for an author. An author, where it was published, when it was published, right? That's all that bibliographic information means. Then it's going to have what's called an abstract, okay? It's going to have an introduction. It's going to have a section, and this is where it starts to, it can change a little bit discipline to discipline, but essentially it's going to have a section on methodology, materials, and methods, right? So essentially in a way that the study was approached. Okay, so it could be called methodology, it could be called materials, it could be called methods, it could be called experiment, right? There could be a bunch of different ways that it's written, but it's also going to have a section of results, right? So results, then there's going to be some analysis of those results, then there's going to be a discussion, and then there's going to be a conclusion, which I didn't add here. Or actually, I think what I did is I accidentally deleted conclusions and put references. There is both conclusion and reference. That's what happens when you were moving your PowerPoint from one deck that was NCU into NU. So you will have conclusions and you will have references, right? So there's a lot of pieces of an article, right? Probably more than you're used to seeing in traditional articles. And there is a specific way to read them. So the way that I tell students to read them, and again, this might change depending on your sort of comfort level as you begin to read more of these articles. You'll kind of create your own cadence, your own style of doing this. But for newer readers, I say read the abstract first. The abstract is an absolute golden ticket when it comes to scholarly articles. What it is it's essentially the summary of what the article is going to be about. So typically what you're going to get in there is a presentation of what the problem is, right? What the research inquiry is, a little bit about how they approached the problem. That's where you might start to get at like the framework that they might be using, right? The type of measurement that they might be using, okay? And then they'll give you a hint at what their results were, okay? So right away, you're gonna know essentially the whole story, but you just won't know the finer details. And the reason why you should read the abstract first is a very obvious reason. If you read an abstract and you're like, this means nothing to me, it's not important to my work, to my future study, are you going to continue reading it? No. Guess what? You're going to save yourself like an hour's worth of time by not reading an article that means nothing to you. So really, really, really take the time to read that abstract and understand what it says. So read that abstract first, then read the introduction. So far, so good. So far, we're approaching this in a linear way, okay? You're gonna read the introduction, see what the background is, get a little bit of context. That's typically where they'll present the problem. Then this is where we flip it on its head. Then we go all the way down and we read the discussion and the conclusion. There's a reason why we do this. The trickiest part of a scholarly article is trying to understand how they did the experiment, or they did the case study, or they did the research. You don't want to waste your time getting all muddled up in those details without knowing what the result was. So we want to do this in a clever way. We get from the abstract the overview. We read the introduction to get a little bit more background context. We jump down to the discussion and the conclusion so that we learn exactly what they think they found from this study, okay? So you get the answer before you get into how they got the answer, okay? So typically in a discussion, what they will do is they will present their findings, they'll sort of take the results and they'll put it into a really nice cohesive statement, right? And you'll kind of get a sense of maybe where there's follow-up information, right? Areas of study that they need to consider, going forward, but also really importantly, what they discovered. Then you're going to review their approach, right? Their methodology and their methods, okay? I'm going to be honest with you. You probably don't want to get too lost in the weeds here, but it's good to review what the measurement was, right? What the test was that they were using, what the conceptual framework was, and then maybe a little bit about like what they were testing, if it was a population, if it was an individual case study, kind of understanding a little bit about what their approach was. But again, unless you're really, really, really going to use this article like a lot in your dissertation, it's probably okay to kind of just review this and get a good idea of what their approach was. Then you're going to go into their results and their analysis, because the results and analysis are going to let you know kind of that raw data, okay? And they're going to do a little bit of analysis of that data. And you've already read the discussion and the conclusion, so you already know that nice little like packaged, answer that they gave you. So now the results and analysis are going to make a lot more sense because you already know the end of the story, right? It's like if you read the last chapter in a book, maybe it didn't make sense right in the moment, but as you go back and you read and you go, now it makes sense. Now that thing that they said in the conclusion totally makes sense, and I'm better for it because I didn't have to struggle through all those really dense and difficult parts of the article in order to get at that. Does that make sense? So there is an approach that allows you to kind of digest this stuff a little bit more easily than just reading it straight through. Okay. And it does take some getting used to. I will be completely transparent with you that it can be difficult at first to go from reading like the title of the article and the abstract and then like jumping all the way down, to read what the conclusion is. Okay. And again, the first couple of times you might do it, you might be like, I'm not sure that this is actually like better for me. But the more you do it and the more you realize that there is a pattern to the way that scholars present their information, you will get very used to saying, okay, I know the answer, but now I want to figure out how they got to the answer, right? So it's like you're kind of just flipping it, kind of like if you've ever done like a math problem, sometimes if you look at the answer, you can like back your way into how they got the answer in that math problem. Maybe that's just me. And then the very last thing that I would be remiss if I didn't point it out to you is that always, always, always check your references, okay? The references are at the very end of the article, and I like to call it, somebody else doing the work for you, okay? So if you have an article, you really love what that article is about, it's spot on. It's exactly the type of work that you want to add into your dissertation, but maybe you're having trouble finding, articles for your lit review or a certain part of your dissertation. Go into the references, see who they reference, see who that author, used for their own lit review or used for, supporting their problem statement, right? Then you can go check out those references either by going into the library and plugging in the title, right, and searching for it there, or going to Google Scholar, seeing if you can get a version out there on Google, or coming to us, right? If you're having trouble finding that article, we can always help you at the library. But really, 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 all parts of the scholarly article can be used in a very specific way, but it takes a little bit of getting used to, because it's not the normal approach that you would take when reading things. So I know that was a lot of information. So before I talk about the things that we have at the library to help you, I just want to know if there's any questions that I can take a look at.
Just from noticing in your search earlier, and I want to make sure I can get to this question because it was asked much earlier. When you did your initial search,
Yes.
at the very beginning, this participant noticed that you check scholarly peer-reviewed journals and not the full text. Is there a reason why?
Yes, there is. So librarians will never suggest that you click full text, only because you might actually find something that the databases are sort of hinting at that you could have access to if only your poor, mean, nasty librarians paid, to have access to that database. But it's a good place for you to say, I need to put that on my interlibrary loan list, right? So we want you to see what's available, okay? Even if we don't have access to it, because we will get you access to it. We will either try to find it on Google Scholar, or we will try to find it through interlibrary loan, right? We don't want you to limit. So don't click full text, because we want you to be able to see what is fully available, not just what we have access to here. It's sort of like giving yourself what do you call those little things you put on
Blinders.
Horses, right? Binders, exactly.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. That's it for now. And I know we have about 5 more minutes. So
yeah.
What else do we want to cover? Anything else in the PowerPoint? You want me to open it up to questions?
I'd love to hear questions, because really that last slide is just a little bit of promotion for the library.
Okay, great. All right. Well, anybody, any questions that came up throughout our session today? Anything that's kind of just burning and you want to ask us while you have us? Let me know. You're welcome to raise your hand or just pop in the chat me, and then I will unmute you. That will work too.
Oh, great literature.
Yeah.
Yeah, so gray literature. So the best way to think about gray literature is it's anything that might be written about your subject area that is not in a scholarly article, right? So what would be a good way? So if we're talking about psych, right? If we're talking about a topic in psychology, right? There might be a lot written about, let's call it like out in popular psychology, outlets, right? Gray literature can also be found in places like online, discussion forums, right? I worked with a scholar in library school who actually heavily used Reddit because they were interested in how people find organs for like transplant when they can't get organs off of a transplant list. So these like this like community of like sharing health information, and the only way that they could find that type of literature that people were actually using and sharing was to go into these sort of like these Reddit communities. I hope that kind of answers that. We also have a entire series called the Dissertation Toolbox, and gray literature is one of the topics that our amazing librarian Amanda Bizet covers. So if you're interested, I would suggest that back on our library website under services, under library events, you see how this says Library Dissertation Toolbox. She periodically does these live, but there's also a ton of recorded versions of it. Yeah. And I'll just very quickly.
Yeah, Steven said, thank you so much for answering that. Let me see.
I'm starting to like trying to remember where we have all of our.
Oh no, you're fine.
Our
You're fine.
things. Oh
While
my
you're
gosh.
searching, Andrea, no apologies necessary. I just to revisit this question. This may have already been answered, but how do we gain access to articles that we're unable to access? This is going to be through the interlibrary loan request.
Yes. So I'll answer both.
Yeah, that would be great. I was going to say,
I'm going to address these two questions. So recorded library workshops are down, or if you scroll down a little bit. So Stephen, you had the question about gray literature. I'm telling you right now, listed under the, oops, sorry guys, the Library Dissertation Toolbox, gaps. Right also, people also have a lot of questions about gap and future, but we also have finding gray literature. So there's that. And then in terms of interlibrary loan, I am going to suggest that everybody does this, is pop down to interlibrary loan. You're first going to have to create an account to request. So I would say, even if you don't need to request something, you do not want to be in a pinch stressing out about getting something and then also needing to create an account. Should go ahead. Every student has an account. You just have to like turn it on. And then when you need to request something, you will be prompted, in our website to actually create a ticket. And if you're not, come on to chat. Usually we have our little chat icon right off to the side here. Come on to chat and just say, hey, how do I request something? And we'll help you. We'll walk you through it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. I appreciate it. And I'd like to thank the attendees for asking some of those questions there that we got to. I hope you found today's session useful in your research endeavors. And I would like to thank Alex again for coming to present. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And until the next time, take care.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. We wouldn't be here without you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.